Welcome to the Wisdom of Grief podcast, where we talk about all things grief, always with the goals of restoring from loss and rediscovering joy. I'm your host, Leslie Palumbo, and today we are traveling back to my ancestral roots. We're heading over to Scotland to meet with Jane Duncan Rogers. She is a writer on Substack, a women's aging gracefully writer and coach, TEDx speaker. She did an amazing talk on how to do a good death. Worth checking out, an author of multiple books, including Gifted by Grief, her story about cancer, loss, and rebirth around the loss of her husband. And we are going to be talking about the intricacies of cancer journey, illness, partner loss, being better prepared for the inevitable with our loved ones and ourselves, and aging gracefully. I know it's a lot to cover. We'll see how far we get. I'm super excited for our conversation, and welcome, Jane Rogers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really happy to be here. I'm always happy to talk about, well, I seem to be always happy to talk about things that other people perhaps don't want to talk about quite so much.
Me too. That's why we're kindred spirits. I feel that
Yes.
sometimes we're just called to do it, and life calls us through our experience. It certainly called you through yours, and you made some purpose out of your pain. So it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it, that I made purpose out of my pain. I never thought about it like that, but that
right.
is it. Absolutely, in a nutshell. Beautiful sentence.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to start by talking about the partner loss aspect of things and your experience with that, because it is such a specific type of loss. It's really a traumatic loss. It is trauma to me because when we are in intimate partnership, we grow together as one in so many ways, and unraveling that after loss is like deeply wrenching. And I think it's far more involved and arduous, as a process than anyone who hasn't gone through it could really recognize.
Yeah.
And it's a type of loss that both you and I share, partner loss. So you wrote that amazing book about your experience with cancer, loss, and widowhood, and called Gifted by Grief. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share a little bit about that, or maybe about your story with us.
No, of course, of course. Well, I didn't plan to write Gifted by Grief, and I certainly didn't plan to call it that. Um, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and about 14 months later, he had died. Now, I had already been writing a blog for years and years and years about small business owners, and I was already writing in that blog about what we were going through, because when you are a solo professional, which I was, or running a small business, you can't have your husband or partner dying without, or being seriously ill, let's say, without it affecting your business in one way or another. So I was already writing about this, and I knew that I would have to write about this process leading up to when he died and after he died. And I knew it would be a book. That's as far as I got in my
Mm.
head. And I also knew that I needed to wait until the timing was right. And I didn't know how I would know the timing was right, but I knew that I would recognize it when that moment came. And it was just like it is in the novels. I literally woke up one morning and I thought, oh my God, I have to write this. And that started me doing a mind map of the outline of what I thought it would look like. Um, I got a little bit frightened about it all at that point, and I put it down again for 2 months. But then I picked it up again, and within that first draft was done within about 6 weeks.
Wow.
I think partly that was because this was probably about 2 years after Philip had died that I started this process, maybe a bit longer.
Mm.
And I it was a part of my healing journey. There's no doubt about it, because it was very cathartic for me. I had to go back and look at my journals. I'd written a lot in my journals, and I knew that I wanted Gifted by Grief to have Philip's voice as well. And he had also been a writer and psychotherapist. And so he had his blog that I was going to visit and take um, aspects of it to put in the book. But this meant that I had to go back and revisit what I had written in that first year after he died, and running up to it. And that was painful. It was quite painful, my God. But I tell you what, a surprise. I had forgotten how painful it was. So I thought I was still, you know, I was still suffering with grief, even after a couple of years, but nothing like I had been. And I had forgotten. I guess, I've never been pregnant, I've never given birth. So maybe that's what it's like for women when they give birth. It's very painful, but then you forget about it.
I know, I know. And then that's why you do it again. Not that we want to do this again, but it is a part of life, grieving, and it will happen again. And
Yeah.
so, but I like the idea, and it's so true. We do forget the bad things. We forget the worst things. And, some parts of talking with people about it, I relive it myself and I go back to it. And you realize how much you have forgotten. Sometimes you don't realize it's such a glacial journey, grief. It goes so slowly sometimes to feel like you're getting better or you're somehow making progress in terms of feeling less pain every day. And to have it marked in some way is important. And so that,
Yeah.
but also I love what you're saying about how, first of all, I love how you approach everything with such openness and intuition. You follow that, and that's so great. And that, but just also that writing was part of your healing. Because I feel like you said you started writing again or sort of re-looking at the writing. You were writing during the process as a way of kind of dealing with the pain, and then you were writing afterwards. And I just do feel like partner loss is such a complete identity loss that the whole process is just a big rebuild. On the subject of partner loss and intimate partner loss, I'm going to be doing a rebuild cohort in October. It's for partner loss and the rebuilding that occurs around that. And it's like a 6-week experience, highly supportive, um, that offers guidance and community for regrowth after intimate partner loss. And it's really just for anyone who's lost their beloved and is actively navigating the what now part of living with loss. And I'm going to put a link to more info in the show notes, but we are going to be limited to 12 people so that it needs to stay intimate. So hop on, and I look forward to being with you on that journey if it feels right for you. And so you do need time to even begin to have your feet on the ground, to even begin to ask those questions of who you are, because you lose everything. You lose who you were when you were with them. You lose your backup, your sounding board, your champion, how they saw you, how they helped you to see, how they helped us to see ourselves, and lose your
Yeah.
future. And like, I guess when I say loss, it implies that it can be found, because I do believe the process of grief, the first several years in particular, are finding it,
Mhm.
finding how all those redistributing our attention, our affection, our needs involving what our partner brought to us. And just, yeah, it's just a lot. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great that it helped.
Well, it did help. And I think, but it was bittersweet, maybe is a good word to describe it, because not wanting to, I remember not wanting to feel better at the same time as wanting to feel better, if you see what I mean. Because I was thinking, if I feel better, that means that I'm getting more distant from Philip, and I didn't want that to happen. At the same time, I wanted him back, which I knew was impossible. But also, if I was being honest with myself, I only wanted him back if he was healthy, because he was not in a good condition at the point he died. And it hadn't really been for the previous probably 5 or 6 months. So there was a whole series of conflicting thoughts and feelings that I had going on. And I think this was the first time that I realized that you could have all sorts of different feelings at the same time, you know. So that in itself was confusing. And the writing both in my journal just for myself, but also in the writing of the manuscript for Gifted by Grief, which after I think about 2/3 of the way through that, I realized, oh my goodness, this is going to be a proper book. I'm going to have to put some money behind this and get it out there in the world to as many people as possible. And that felt like would be honoring Philip in the way that Philip and me actually, but honoring him in the way that he needed to be honored. So that's what I did. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think honoring I really relate with what you're saying about not wanting to feel better
Mhm.
because you feel that somehow um, it brings you farther away. Like every step forward, it's like there's this rubber band pull back. Like I just want it back and I just don't want to be moving farther away and I'm going to lose the person. And part
Yeah.
of the journey of of the rebuild basically after loss is to figure out, how do we bring them forward with us? And part of that, I do think a lot of times part of that is finding a way to honor who they were. Maybe it's qualities about them or what they did. And you were both writers. So it makes a lot of sense that the writing would be a way to honor him and the story that you lived together and your love and your relationship and having other people be able to benefit from that is really a way of honoring that. Yeah.
Yeah, and in a way, we had both been involved in that arena in our work. I had been working as a counselor and coach for a long time. He'd been working as a psychotherapist. Our lives were about enabling people to feel better in their lives. And so somehow it was like, I don't think I thought about this particularly at the time, but clearly looking back, I was needing for myself, but also, well, yeah, for myself, on behalf of him, if you like, to make what this big event in both our lives mean something for other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that would give me something. And and knowing that I was doing that, I don't think we ever talked about whether I would write about this. I can't remember that. But I knew that he would like this. And, when you put out a book, you get opportunities like this, to talk on a podcast or give a speaking engagement or whatever it is. So I had loads of opportunities, legitimate opportunities to talk about Philip. That was wonderful. It
Yeah.
was like, I hadn't
Yeah.
realized that would happen, but it felt really good.
Well, it's like keeping him alive and bringing him forward with you and continuing that relationship.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah. Yeah. That's why we do what we do. Yeah. It's good. One of the things in the book I appreciated was that you talked about I appreciated your approach to dealing with cancer because I feel like cancer is such an alternate universe. And I remember my own husband was terminal at diagnosis. So he was, given whatever, 3 months to live, and nobody was going to live, nobody who had ever had this very rare form of cancer had ever lived beyond 5 years. Certainly not beyond, most not beyond one. I think one person had lived beyond five. So we just entered that world, that kind of twilight zone really, really quickly. And I appreciate you in the book. You talk about like sort of the black humor or the gallows humor. You also talked about that in your TED talk too. It's just that we used to have this thing where like every time we would go to the doctor because it was such a rare thing, there would be like 7 people following the doctor to come in and look at the curiosity that he became. Right. But we would laugh about it. We'd be like, oh, here comes, like they all want to see case number 131. And we called him 131 because he was like the 131st person who'd ever had this cancer. But
Wow.
that brought so much lightness, and counterbalanced all the real heaviness that was going on at the time. And you had that experience as well.
I did have that experience, and I think the first instance of it, I might have talked about this in the book, I can't remember, was when we were ringing our family to tell them that he had been diagnosed with cancer, and it was stomach cancer for Philip. And I told my brother this, and we talked a bit about it. I can't remember, but he ended the conversation by saying, "Well, just think about it this way. At least the food bills will go down." And I thought that was hilarious. Fortunately, I can see
Yeah.
that not everybody would think that was hilarious, but and I also understood it was his way of coping with a very difficult situation, hearing this news that somebody in your family that you love and care for has got a serious illness. And but I think there's there's healing in a strange sort of way in laughter if we can find it, and
Yeah.
it is a
Yeah.
dodgy subject because everybody's sense of humor is so different. But yeah.
But
I
I've often thought like though that people who have been through it do relate to that kind of gallows humor. You know, like my husband was a very funny man, so the humor was there already, and so it just needed to be a part of the experience. And he would just be like he'd like pull out his wallet. He'd be like, "You want the cancer card? Should we pull it out now? Do we need it? Like for this, to get out of this or that or something." We would just it just really is healing.
yeah.
It is there is so that's interesting your point about like so healing's going on while the journey is happening, that all this idea that there are so many emotions happening at once, that there is some joy amidst the sadness, and then there's this desire to move forward but this desire to move back. There's all these competing emotions that are really happening, and impulses that are happening at once.
Yeah, it was
um
really, I can remember that there was a day about 3 weeks after Philip had died, and it was so this he had died just before Christmas. So it was one of those Scottish days that was very, very cold. There wasn't any snow, but there was lots of blue sky and sunshine, not hot sunshine, but sunshine. And it was very beautiful as I went for a walk in the woods. And I can remember having this feeling and then a thought, which was, oh my goodness, I feel happy. And I was like, how can I possibly be feeling happy when I know that I'm walking home to an empty house? And yet, in that moment, I had felt like that as I was
yeah,
looking at the sunlight on the trees and the smell of the crisp air, and it just fed into me in that moment. It didn't last for very long, I have to say, but it was there.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
it's good proof. That's good proof for us, and we need it. Like it reminds me that like I remember the night that my husband was dying. It was in the hospital, but we were having hospice, and everybody had gone home to take a rest because it wasn't quite happening yet. But I was there with him, and I was actually reading him uh, a book, his favorite poems. I was reading him a book of poetry, Robert Frost, and then um, I looked out of the window of the hospital, and there was this incredible sunset. And I just thought, like, I said in my heart, I said, "Thank you for this day." I felt gratitude. Like it was so weird and opposite to what was actually the real decimation and sadness that was also happening at the same
yeah,
time. But there was this moment of peace, and then there was this moment of gratitude, and we need that during the heaviness because there's just so much suffering going on. And I think the suffering is probably our own suffering. And
mm,
then if someone was ill before they died, the suffering that they experienced, the suffering that family around us experienced, the suffering, that I find to be one of the thorniest parts of grief. It certainly was for me. And I always sort of wondered on that journey of having somebody be ill before they died, like, I don't know what's worse, being the person suffering the illness or affliction, or being the person who loves and watches the one suffering. I don't
yeah.
know.
I don't know either. And I mean, a very good girlfriend of mine has recently just died, and it was sudden. It was a heart attack. And I'm so grateful for her that she had that. She didn't have to go through all the other, the long drawn out times or however long it is of knowing that you have a terminal illness. Um, but on the other hand, when I look at me and Philip, so we had, although he was ill for, well, he had 14 months from diagnosis, the first 6 or 8 of those, we were very hopeful because we had been told to be hopeful. He was to have chemo and then an operation and then more chemo. And if they got all the cancer out in the operation, then he could look forward to a good another 20 years or so. And he was 66 already. So we, of course, focused on that. So actually, it wasn't until after the operation hadn't worked that we really came to terms with the fact that this, in a few months, that would be it. And I can't remember why I'm telling you that now, but I could do remember it that it was like, oh my God, that um
The suffering part of grief we were talking about, and
yeah.
people,
So I personally definitely got to a point where I needed him to go for his suffering to end, and it didn't matter if I
yeah,
was going to suffer afterwards, knowing I just when you love somebody and you watch them in pain or knowing that there is, there isn't much time left except what they've got, which you hope isn't painful, but in Philip's case, there was pain that couldn't be managed. It's like I just wanted him out of pain. It didn't matter that I was going to be left alone for the rest of my life. That was totally irrelevant. And yeah, not let's put it this way, not everybody in the family felt like that, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. I can completely relate. I was on a my husband had as part of his treatment at the end, and he went on for 6 years, so that was a long time. And at the end was willing to do whatever it took to try and get a little extra time with his son, with us. And so the I always think of in the terms of the suffering, the cancer is its own, the cancer world is its own culture too. And I've always really felt and had trouble with the predominant view that cancer is a battle, and it's like the traditional treatment is such a blunt instrument.
yeah,
And that and they're violent. If it doesn't kill you, the treatment doesn't kill you, the cancer will. It's one or the other. Or this journey of side effects, that we went down a rabbit hole on, because my husband had um, intractable hiccups as one of his side effects that he could not take. I have to take a full breath when I say that. He could not take a full breath for 9 months
wow,
before his death. And that suffering, I understand, and I can relate with that wish for that to be over. Just please let that be over, because it doesn't, I don't see it, getting better, but just please let that be over for him.
yeah, yeah.
Because it's very hard to watch. But one of the ways that you all seem to have dealt with your husband's cancer and the whole experience was, and then possible death was preparation.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, because that seems like it was so useful.
Well, it was very useful. Well, basically, we received an email from a friend in America who said, well, I received it. She said, make sure that Philip answers these questions before he goes. So this was probably 6 or 7 months before he actually died. But of course, when somebody's in the process of dying, you never know when it's going to be. So I'm looking back, I can see that it was 6 or 7 months. But anyway, so it had all these very practical questions that I was to ask Philip and get answers for. Things like, what are your passwords? What kind of coffin do you want? How do you want your body to be dressed? All sorts. I mean, there must have been at least 20.
Yeah.
When I saw what it was, I just didn't read the rest of the email. I just forgot about it. But she sent that email another 2 times. And on the
Mm.
third time, I thought, oh God. So I told him at that point, I said, we're going to have to answer these. He was a bit reluctant, but we knew that Barbara, our friend, would be on our backs if we didn't do this. So, and we recognized, of course, that she was sending this information in the spirit of love, of course. So we sat up in bed together one Saturday morning while he was still well enough, obviously, with the laptop, and I put all those questions into a Word document and I just asked him, and then he either gave me his answers or we discussed them and I put those answers down. And you know what? It was one of the most intimate, most beautiful, most nourishing, warm and loving conversations that we've ever had. It was quite
Mm.
extraordinary. Neither of us had expected that. We thought we were scared. We didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
just lovely, really lovely. And then we forgot all about it because we didn't need to pay any more attention to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
We
afterward,
did that. Go ahead.
sorry, go on.
No.
Okay. Well, just thinking afterwards, after he had died and the funeral director came to the house and he asked me a question that I knew how to answer because we'd asked it of each other. And
Mm.
it was, how do you want him to be dressed? And I if I hadn't known Philip's answer, I would have said something completely different. But Philip had told me he wanted to be dressed in his dressing gown. Now, I wouldn't have thought of this, but his dressing gown was one that I had made for him, and he really loved it.
Mm. Mm. Wow.
Able to tell the funeral director that, knowing that Philip had told me, knowing that I was carrying out his wishes, that was a tiny bit of comfort at an awful time, a really horrible time. But it did make a difference. Quite, I mean, I say a tiny bit of comfort. The effect of it was massive for me to be able to do that. And that was just one instance. There were other instances as well. So, yeah,
Yeah, there's so many ways in which we're overwhelmed with decisions at that time and to have some of those made in advance. But it is true that, having those conversations, preparing for death or the possibility of death, it involves facing the denial that we all, like at least in the Western world, have about the reality that dying is a fact of life. It's not necessarily a betrayal. And as you said in your TED talk, you said something like, "We don't know it's the last breath until after it happened." But we
that's
don't
right.
know when it's happening for all of us. It's going to happen. We just don't know when. But we feel superstitious about even talking about the possibility of death, as if
Mm,
we might bring it on by talking about it. And in the years that I worked in hospice, people didn't want to use the word hospice. It was a bad word because it implied death. It implied, and death is taboo in our culture. And it did feel like somehow, it's very hard for us to face it. But I like the way you talk about moving through that doorway and then just having it be one of the most intimate experiences, because I do feel preparation is such a good tool. It's action oriented. It gives you a place to channel all the emotions. It gives you
yeah.
somewhere useful to put them. It produces some sense of satisfaction in that way, and also it's produces some sense of empowerment in a situation in which we're very powerless. And I think it's also a form of pre-grieving. I see it in its own way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're right. And I wrote about this conversation in Gifted by Grief, and that was the chapter that most people referred to. There was one week here
Mm.
in locally where I just kept being stopped by people who said, "Oh my goodness, I need to answer these questions too." And so eventually I get the message and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Life is asking me to do something here. I'll put on a workshop so that people can answer these questions as well. So this was my background, putting on workshops and leading personal growth stuff and everything. That was normal for me. So it wasn't difficult to do that. Um, and but that workshop was oversubscribed, which I was delighted about, I mean, if I was going to support the book getting out there in the world, this was a good way to do it. And that because I was responding to people saying what they wanted. Um, yeah, so that was pretty important.
Yeah. And so if we're doing that, if we're doing preparation and talking, what are the questions we need to ask? I know it's a book. It's another one of your books, isn't it?
It is another
That
book.
we need to read. Yeah.
Yeah, so the second book is called Before I Go, the Essential Guide to Creating a Good End of Life Plan. Now, unfortunately, the company that I created is no longer. So the company mentioned in that book, the links don't work. And can I get the publisher to attend to this? No. But anyway, never mind. There's still lots of good information in it. But I think that well, I always thought that there are several, as it turned out, there became several areas. So the whole password stuff, that's like your digital legacy. It's
Mm.
like, you know what? We are going to, or you are going to still be alive online after you are dead in person in your body, unless you've decided how you want your online persona to be before you actually die. I mean, that's like, oh yeah, when people think about it, they get it. Then it's another step to do something about it, of course, because you have to decide, what you want on social media and all this kind of stuff. But that's a whole area, and it is an area now, a digital legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people have
Mm.
a
Mm.
like a digital executor, somebody who'll take care of all their online stuff. There's also the legals, of course, there's the legals, but that's a big area all by itself. That's what most people know
Yeah.
about. And the funeral,
Yeah.
if people choose to have a funeral, that's another thing that people know about. But there's also what I call your living legacy, i.e., now when you're still alive, how do you want to be? remembered. So, for example, with me and Philip, one of the
Mm.
questions was, do you have any precious things that you would like to leave to some particular people? So that was really nice for me to be able to do after he had died, knowing that he'd asked that this particular item, for example, there was a bowl that he wanted to give to his daughter, and for a particular reason, I can't remember the story behind it now, but it was there. And that's a very precious thing to be able to do.
Hmm.
But you have to think about these things beforehand, you know.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
What else? Yeah, well, there's another couple of areas. One is you're assuming that you're able to think about your last day's wishes, like how would you ideally like to be dying? What kind of treatment would you like not to have? That's your advanced decision. Um, and then, and also what I call the household organization, which is, and this came up because Philip and I did not have children together. He had children from a previous marriage, but together I was just going to be on my own in the house after he had died. And there were several things that I just did not know how they worked because I hadn't thought about it. Even though I'd had these questions, we hadn't covered everything.
Hmm.
Now, I know that sounds a bit silly, really. Like for me, it was one night, this was about a month, I think, after he had died. A friend had been visiting and she'd gone. And I came home, having taken her to the airport. I came home to an empty house, which I used to open the front door and I'd just shout out, "Hello, I'm home," even though I knew there would be no answer, you know. I went to turn
Yeah.
on the television and in those days we were still watching television. But anyway, and the television guide did not come up like I was expecting it to, and I could not find a way to get back to it. And that completely broke me. I was in floods of tears because previously I would have just asked him and he would have found out what to do. And
Yeah.
I couldn't think straight. And that's what happens with grief. You think you're thinking straight, but often you're not. And things that would be normally not such a big deal are enormous. So
Yeah.
that could have been taken care of if I'd had a piece of paper with 2 or 3 steps on that we had discussed beforehand, you know, how to turn on the television or how to turn on
Yes.
the heating system or how the internet router system works and all the rest of it, you know, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
The
It's so interesting. It's everything's so amplified during grief. So it's just, but I also think that whole process of redistribution, rebuilding, re-engaging with life, but just picking up the aftermath of what someone else did and we have to now do. It's so helpful to have had some guidance. It's
yeah,
incredibly helpful to have guidance. And in the places that we don't have guidance, I do think that it's so hard because um, there's just so much. If we have to make decisions by ourselves, there can be this feeling of guilt or disloyalty, like how I don't know if I'm
yeah,
doing it the right way, or I know that I'm doing it in the way that works for me now, but may not be the way my partner would have wanted it. And then we have this whole guilt, and it's just such a part of disloyalty is part of the conversation. And I think permission to get to move forward and re-engage in ways that work for us does not mean dishonoring. I think we have to give ourselves permission and differentiate between that.
yeah, definitely. And I did know that when that sort of thing happened for me, that somehow in my head I knew that it would be okay that I was doing what I was doing, you know, and that Philip may or may not have approved, but then my practical side would kick in and I would get shirty with him, you know. I'd be like, yeah, well, you're not here, so I'm just going to do it my way.
Exactly. I remember going to the grocery store and just being completely like, I don't even know what to buy because he was very particular. He was Italian. He loved his food. He loved it cooked a certain way. There was just, he was also an incredible cook and it was an artist. And here I was just picking up the pieces like, I don't even know what I like to eat. I know what my family likes to eat, but what do I really like? And what if it's completely different from what they liked? And just contending with all that. But one of the things that you also talked about in your TED talk was you talked about your own grieving and about facing feelings that came in. And you said something about I opened the doors and the windows and to welcome them all in. But then I also opened the back door so that I could let the feelings out again. And
Yeah.
just this idea of letting them in and letting them out like the tide, and keeping that metaphorical sort of back door open feels important.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes we can really drown. They come in and they're going to come in anyway. They're going to knock down the door if you don't leave it open. But then they can stay longer, and we have to usher them out. I think, like as Rumi said, welcome them in as visitors and usher them out the door when their stay is up.
Exactly, exactly. And that analogy of what I now call front door, back door thinking is not
Mm,
something that I was thinking at the time. It's what that was one of the things that came up during while I was reflecting on everything. But at the time, what I knew was only I remembered Louise Hay, the famous author of You Can Heal Your Life, saying, "You can what you feel, you can heal." So I clung on to that. I clung
mm,
on to that, knowing that it was true and had experience of that already in my life, but I didn't want to feel what I was feeling because it was extremely painful and very, very intense. It didn't matter what it was, I was feeling it intensely, much more so than I would ever have been led to believe from any of my studies, which I had studied bereavement and everything, but I was completely sidelined by it. And I held on to this statement, what you feel you can heal, as a way to help me navigate myself through those stormy waters, if you like. Um, and afterwards, I realized that's what I was doing. I wasn't trying to push the feelings away. I was allowing them to come in. And the fact that I also allowed them to go actually was very healthy. And I mean, there's one thing that we know, all of us know this about feelings, no matter whether we like the feelings or not, they always change. One moment you're feeling one way, the next minute another, or one day you're feeling like this, the next day you're feeling like that, whatever it is, whether it's a feeling that we love and we want it to stay, or it's a feeling that we don't love and we don't want it to stay.
yeah, yeah, and they're visitors, right? They're visitors. They come and they go.
I
Yeah,
do.
sometimes they stay too long, like
Sometimes I do.
like all house guests. It happens that they stay too long, but yes, it's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it strikes me as you're talking about just how much more difficult it is than we realize. I do think of back to the idea of how unique partner loss is. I think it's really, I'm not sure that people recognize how moment to moment it is and for how long. In terms of every moment, you're reaching out like a live wire to plug in to what is normally your connection.
Yeah.
And you go to plug it in every thought because you're integrated with this person. You're kind of joined, and it's your everything. It's the person you tell your dumb thing about. I stepped in gum today, but
Yeah.
you're looking for the plug, and the plug doesn't fit, and and that is happening over and over and over again for years after partner loss. And I think it's people don't realize just how intensive and all encompassing for how long that it
No, no.
is.
No, and it's a really good analogy, and I absolutely recognize that. And because whether you like it or not, you're forced to discover who you are as the plug without the socket, if you like, And that's one of the difficulties is you don't want that. I didn't want to be a new person. I hadn't asked for this. I was okay the way I was, I thought. But I didn't have an option, and I didn't want to change. I didn't want any of these things, but I did recognize that because it had happened, I was going to have to go along with this for the ride, whether I liked it or not. And
Yeah.
I did get a bit obsessed. I did get obsessed with the idea that, when I was with Philip when he died, and so I saw that there was a huge, well, I was going to say there's a huge change. There wasn't any change at all. It didn't look like there was any change really in him just lying there from being alive to being dead. And yet there was a massive change, massive.
Hmm.
I became, I remember about 2 or 3 weeks later, I woke up and my first thought was, what was it that was in him? What is it in me now, in this body, that makes me alive and that was missing when he had died? And I set off with a vengeance to discover what on earth that was, because it
Yeah.
was because it was so obvious that who he was not that body that was lying on the bed. And very, very quickly, so quickly it shocked me even, I was not interested in his body anymore because it wasn't him. Now, I know that's not the case for most people probably, and tending to the body, for example, can be a very, very nurturing thing to do and part of the grief healing. But for me, it was different, and I went off on this journey, which is quite a lot of what Gifted by Grief is also about. But
Yeah.
but it
Yeah, because everyone has to go on that journey, that spiritual journey of what happens after we die, what is it, what is life, what is the animation of the body. I had a similar experience to you in that I was with my husband when he passed away, and um, so was my son, and we both had this same experience where we know the moment, the moment where he was not animated anymore. The animation left his body. And it was, where did it go? Like, and in your TED talk, you say you're looking up at the sky looking for him, right? But like, and I'm looking up as I'm doing it. I'm like thinking he went up there, because I don't know why. That's our collective consciousness. But what really happened, and the journey of what happened, why did this happen? If I believe in something greater, and whatever it is that I believe in, how this has tested it, because life didn't turn out like we wanted. And so then if life doesn't turn out like we want, then who's governing all that? What's governing the whole spiritual crisis is just so part and parcel part of grief.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. And also I'm just remembering that there was another I used to go every morning to a kind of devotional singing, Teze singing it was called, done here in our community. So just for half an hour, and it was beautiful and I loved it and had done for many, many years. But after Philip died, this is one of the things that changed. I started hating it. I couldn't go any longer. But that felt like a bereavement as well, you know? It was like a major part of my life that had been such a source of sustenance was no longer a source of sustenance. And that really hit me actually because I lost the connection with that group of people and I didn't have immediately anything to replace it with. So yeah, I was discovering that I was a different person without wanting to be a different person, if you know what I mean. I'm sure you do know what I mean.
I do. I know exactly what you mean, in my own way. And you're speaking to that idea of, did you ever find your way back to that group again? I'm just curious. Or was
I
it just over? It's,
No, it was I have been back once or twice, but it didn't work. It has not worked for me, so I never have gone back again.
yeah, it's just interesting, those secondary losses, which become because they become triggers, things you might have done together, things you shared, experiences you shared, travel,
Yeah,
whatever it is, and then you can't do it anymore.
yeah.
And suddenly the thing that really fed you and fed your heart is actually hurting your heart. And it's just feels like such an insult and a
I know.
betrayal.
Oh, I know. Just remembering that we used to love watching house renovation programs together. But after he
Mhm.
died, I couldn't watch them. I was so not
Yeah,
interested, and it was too painful anyway, but I just wasn't interested, you know.
yeah,
I was the
yeah,
one who liked the interior design bit. He liked the sort of actual building bit, you know. So anyway, sad.
yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of it does it just sometimes there's a certain point at which it just feels like everything's a loss because everything is being emptied out of you. And
Yeah.
then there's the process of refilling, which for you has involved a lot of writing and a lot of yeah.
Yeah, there was also, though, a time about 6 months after he had died, I was invited to give a talk, an in-person talk to a local business group in about 6 months' time. So in my head, I reasoned that'll be a year from when after Phillips died, you know, I'll surely be able to do it by then. So I said yes. And then like, you know, 2 weeks before the actual talk, and I am terrified, wishing that I had never, never said yes to this. How on earth was I going to go out and do this? And, you know, I was used to talking, I was used to doing all this sort of stuff. It was on a subject that I knew about, but I still didn't want to do it. Anyway, of course, I did do it because I couldn't get out of it. And it was really great, actually. It was really good for me because I realized that I was drawing on things that I had known about in my career, that I was able to share stories and that I could still operate in this way and give something to people who would benefit from it, even though this major thing had happened in my life. And that was actually a huge confidence builder for me. It was very important, that as a sort of turning point. But if I hadn't said yes, thinking that I'd be okay, I wouldn't have done it. I would not have done it.
Yeah, maybe that teaches us something. Maybe it says at a certain point you begin to feel like you can say yes, or you
Yeah,
say yes because you don't know any better, and then you just do it
exactly.
anyway.
Yeah,
But saying yes is part of it.
yeah, yeah.
Permission and saying yes to kind of just it's a lot of trial and error
It is not.
rebuilding a
Yeah,
life.
yeah, it
Yeah,
is. And I didn't always get things right by any means, but for a long time I do remember giving myself permission to it was okay to go to meetings or gatherings or whatever it was. And if I didn't want to be there after 5 minutes, I could leave. And that happened quite a lot, actually. Um, Even if it was just my Pilates exercise class, there's something about
yeah,
lying down on that mat that the tears would start and I would just get up and go. And I'd only been there for 2 minutes, but I
yeah.
decided.
And I think you're right. The exit strategy is very important.
Mhm.
I had an exit strategy and exit permission for everything.
Yeah,
And
me
I would give
too.
myself permission to say, like, I'm sorry, I have a migraine, I have to go. Like, because I didn't want to talk about why I had to go.
Mhm.
That's fine. I gave myself permission for all of it. I was like, exit strategy, find the exits every time you go in anywhere. Bring your own car. Like, I would bring my own car. I
Me
just
too.
knew that sometimes I'd hit a wall
Mhm.
and that wall would demand all of my, then grief would demand all of my attention. So I would need to tend to it and I couldn't do it around people. And I knew, you start to learn your triggers and things, but sometimes you don't. They really just whack you out of nowhere. I
Mm.
remember the feeling like after I had taken time off when my husband was ill and I was going to go back to work, and I'm a grief counselor. And I was like, I don't know if I can
Mm.
do this ever again. Like, I don't know that I can do this. I guess I can just, all I can do is try, and it's either going to work or it's not going to work. And I'm just going to show up and see. And
Mm.
it, like, luckily for me, ended up working. I say that because it feeds me in a very deep way to be able, like you, to be able to help others find the light in dark times. And then it became part of my healing as well, and still is part of my healing now, but it's a lot
Yeah,
of trial and error that
yeah.
rebuild. Yeah.
Yes. I've forgotten that I used to take my own car to places, but yeah, that was one of my strategies as well. But if I look back at it now, I see that all these things that we've been talking about, they are acts of love towards ourselves. That, we weren't judging ourselves for being this way. We were allowing it to be there. We recognized that the feelings would come and go. We didn't care what people thought. No,
Yes.
I didn't care what people thought. I just, you know what? Caring what people think, which has been in my life quite a big thing. It did not matter. Oh my God, did it not matter after this? It was just like everything was irrelevant in the face of this.
Yes. In the face of this, it's so true. I do think grief requires an expand. The reason I think the evolutionary purpose of grief, I think the developmental passage that is loss and grief is telling us it forces an expansion of self-compassion,
Yeah,
an
yeah.
expansion of just giving ourselves permission and be who we are. I used to go down to the beach at sunset and I'd have my headphones in and I would listen to my grief list and I would just dance and cry on the beach. People, I'm sure, thought I was absolutely nuts. But there it is, that's we do
Yeah.
what we have to do. But I think, you know, that brings me to my thought about your Substack, which I find so helpful. I think it's Aging Gracefully, and
Embracing aging. It's called embracing
embracing
aging.
aging. I
Yeah,
love it. It is about aging gracefully, that's for sure.
yeah.
And maybe I'm thinking about that because mine happened. I think I lost my husband when I was 49. So I was like in midlife and I was moving towards this transition. I think aging is a grief in and of itself. It's
Mm,
really this process of losing the externals while the internals are kind of cementing themselves.
yeah,
And it reminded me of it when you were saying we just don't care. In the face of the enormity of grief, we don't care. And sometimes in the face of aging, we stop caring too. And I think
yeah.
that's kind of what's beautiful about it. Um,
Mm,
I remember like there was an episode of This American Life, which was American public radio show with Ira Glass, and he was asking people which superpower would you rather have, and it was flight or invisibility. And I actually recently have been thinking like I believe that invisibility is the superpower we get with aging because, let's be honest, especially women, everyone begins to look through you, and then you can fully inhabit your own self, like you were explaining,
Yeah.
without this added worry of what people might think about it, because no one's really noticing you. And I think it's really quite freeing. That's,
It's, it's ironic. That's another thing that makes me laugh, you know. I mean, when I first realized this, it was like, hang on a minute, I'm still here. But I quite quickly came to understanding the freedom in that actually. And I thought it was very funny that whereas I had been bothered about what I looked like before, as soon as I noticed my wrinkles, which according to me happened overnight, you know, on my face. But of
they
course they
do.
didn't happen overnight. But anyway,
Yeah.
um, I just thought it was funny because it was only going to get worse. So I might as well learn to love myself, my wrinkles, my body, my all the abilities and not abilities that, you know, that are happening as part of aging. And that's really what led me to write about embracing aging after I'd left the previous business and I'd stopped writing actually as well. And that was quite like, oh, stop writing. Yeah, but I did. Anyway, this is what has
Hmm.
emerged as a result, which is just a few months ago now. And of course, death and bereavement and grief is part of embracing aging because it is all about loss. You are, you know, things that you were once able to do easily are not so available anymore, let's say. And that's just one aspect of it. So I just had this image that I would, a bit like what we talked about with feelings, I would reach out and I would give aging a great big hug, which is where embracing aging came from. And
Mm.
and then I would, because I was having to do it, I would invite other people along the journey with me and see what happens. And that's what I write about mostly.
Yeah, you're right about self-compassion. That's part of it too, right? Is that we have to, yeah, that's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Um, okay, so I really want to ask you so many things. I want to ask you about Louise Hay and studying with Louise Hay. That sounds like it was amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Well, actually, it was way back in 1990, and I'd come from I was working in Greece at the time, so I went from Greece to San Diego to do her training. Now, this turned out to be, I didn't realize it, but the last training that she personally did for what she called at the time, You Can Heal Your Life group study leaders. So we were authorized to hold study groups based on her book. And I was the first person to do that and bring it back to the UK and Europe, which was wonderful. And
Mhm.
she was
Yeah,
amazing. She
yeah,
just was amazing.
yeah.
She had this particular blend of spirituality and practicality, which I think I have that as well, which is probably why I liked her so much. Um, I can remember really funny. I met her in face to face in London one time. We were having a cup of tea together in some posh place, probably near Harrods or something. And I noticed I must have had her on a pedestal without realizing because she was taking a sip of her cup of tea and I noticed that her nail polish was chipped. And because I noticed that, she suddenly tumbled off this pedestal and became an ordinary person who has chipped
Yeah,
nail polish, you know.
yeah.
And that was great actually, because it made me able to relate to her more easily, let's say. At that time, I was like a bit in awe of her, you know. So,
Yeah. Well, you do have such a sense of sincerity, but and also openness and wisdom that I feel like is how you've made so much of the journey that you've been on. I'm sure that that is partially due to, your experiences with her, but it is also, is that that approach resonates for you. So, yeah,
yeah, I mean, you know, people often do say this. They say how open and honest and willing to be vulnerable I am. And I don't
yeah,
know another way
yeah,
to be, you know, I do not
yeah.
know another way to be. It does mean that I quite often don't get jokes because they're not my sense of humor. And I certainly don't get mixed messages very well, you know,
Hmm.
but, you know, who cares?
Yeah, that's okay. It's worth it. And it's a great gift to all of us. So I always like to ask three questions to any guest on the podcast. And I wonder if you can sort of think about these truths for you in kind of like a word or a sentence. Um, the first one is, what was the most challenging thing about your grief?
Yeah, it was the overwhelming feelings. I had no idea I was going to be completely taken over by all sorts. And for me, the strongest one was anger. I was very, very angry a lot.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think also when we think we're, and most of us are like, we think we're pretty, we have it all together, and then suddenly it all falls apart so completely, it makes us question ourselves and our capacities too.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one thing that happened to me. Um, so what is the most important thing you gained from the experience of grief? Not loss, but grief, the process.
Well, I think that, well, I said it in the title of the book, really, that actually it has gifts. Now, I knew that in theory,
Yeah,
didn't want to know it. And I was absolutely not interested in finding any gifts in the early days or even the early months. Not interested. In fact, if somebody had given me my book, I would have thrown it out the window. There's a
I get
timing
that.
to give a book with a title like that, there's a timing for it. But anyway, but there was,
Yeah,
and I knew and I trusted that if there were gifts to be found, I would find them because this was my greatest fear that had come true, that Philip had died and I would be left on my own because we didn't have kids. Um, and um, and so I had to trust in a way that there would be gifts awaiting me, let's say. And yeah, there've been
yeah.
plenty of them.
Mm, that's beautiful. And then, like, what advice would you give to someone in grief?
Well, this one is easy for me, and I always say the same thing, which is don't judge your feelings, no censoring, just allow it to happen. If you notice that you're bursting into tears in the middle of a coffee shop, let it happen. It's okay. If you have to get up and walk out of a meeting, let it happen. It doesn't matter. Just allow them to be there because they're there for a purpose. They are bringing healing, actually. It's when we sh try to shove them away or not have them that the trouble is caused.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jane, for sharing your soul's journey
Yeah.
so vulnerably and openly and honestly, and also your wisdom of grief with us today. And I
Thank
do
you.
feel so like I feel so appreciative. We've been on very similar journeys in many ways, and I am deeply grateful for this talk and for our connection. So thank you
Yeah,
so
me too.
much. And then can you just tell people where and how they might, I'll put it in the show notes too, but you can tell people where and how they might be able to reach you, find out more, read more.
Sure. You can go to my main website, which is janeduncanrogers.com, or on Substack, it's Embracing Aging. Might say Jane Duncan Rogers, but anyway, you'll find it there. And that's it actually. Or you can, I don't really use social media very much except Facebook. And I just have I don't even have a business page there. I just have me. Come and follow me if you
There
want.
you are. Excellent. Sounds great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just taking a few minutes at the end here on the subject of partner loss, because I am doing a partner loss rebuild group in October. It's a 6 week cohort, highly supportive experience that offers guidance and community for regrowth after intimate partner loss. And as we know, partner loss is such a profound moment to moment, all encompassing loss that goes beyond what really anyone who hasn't experienced it can begin to comprehend. And so this is really for anyone who's lost their beloved and is actively navigating the what now part of living with loss. And I will put a link with more info in the show notes. And yeah, so if it feels right for you, we are limited to 12 people so that it has to, because it needs to stay intimate. So hop on and look at that. And I look forward to being with you on that journey if that feels right for you. And until next time, I wish you peace as you tread the waters of grief.